Jimmy Kimmel cracked a joke on live TV, expecting laughs, but Jasmine Crockett's calm response left him speechless and the audience stunned. The cameras were already rolling when Jasmine Crockett stepped onto the stage. Not a hint of hesitation in her walk. Black heels, emerald green blazer, tight coils styled up into a bun that didn't move an inch. She shook Jimmy Kimmel's hand, smiled politely, and took her seat across from him as the audience clapped with that familiar late-night energy, part enthusiasm, part habit. Jimmy leaned back in his chair with that mischievous grin he always wore when a politician visited. "Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, everybody," he said. "The firecracker from Dallas. Or should I say, the one-woman filibuster machine." Jasmine let out a short laugh, but you could already tell she'd heard it all before. "You can call me Jasmine," she said, smooth and warm like syrup over hot toast. "But I'm nobody's firecracker." The audience laughed, but it was the kind of laugh people do when they're not sure who the joke is on. The first few minutes rolled by like any late-night interview. Jimmy poked fun at Congress, the state of politics, the drama inside the Capitol. Jasmine took it in stride, gave a few practiced answers, slipped in a few smart jabs of her own. Then Jimmy pulled out a note card and changed the tone. "So, Jasmine," he said, leaning in with a smile, "you're known for being, how should I put it, a little spicy. Is that a strategy, or do you just wake up ready to fight every morning?" A couple people in the audience chuckled. Jasmine tilted her head slightly, studying him. Jimmy kept going. "I mean, it's almost like you're auditioning for a Real Housewives spin-off. The Hill Wives of Capitol Hill." The room laughed again, a little louder this time, but there was a pause just before it, the kind that hangs there for a second too long. Jasmine didn't laugh. She reached for the mug of water on the side table, took a sip, and set it back down. "I'll answer that," she said, "but let me ask you something first." Jimmy raised his eyebrows. "Okay. You ever get tired of white guys calling you spicy just because you won't let them talk over you?" The room went quiet. Not the stunned silence of a bad joke. This was something different. Eyes widened. A few people gave that involuntary ooh sound that spills out when a line cuts too deep to ignore. Jimmy sat back in his chair, blinking. For the first time in the interview, he didn't have a quick line ready. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't blink. She just looked at him, patient and steady, like she was used to this sort of moment. There was something in the air now. Not tension exactly, but attention. Every person in that room, even the ones half watching from their phones, was now tuned in. Jimmy laughed nervously, trying to shift the energy back. "Okay, I walked into that one." "No," she said. "You ran." But the audience wasn't laughing the same way anymore, and neither was Jimmy. Jimmy tapped his note cards against the desk, a twitch he always did when he needed a moment to recover. But this time, it wasn't just nerves. He looked like he was trying to figure out where the rails had gone, because the train had just jumped. "Well," he said, glancing down, "this interview's already way more interesting than the one we did with the guy who writes fortune cookies." A few polite chuckles. Jasmine crossed her legs and folded her hands neatly in her lap. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Jimmy pushed on, probably hoping to get things back on track. "You've been very vocal about, well, pretty much everything. Some people say you're bold. Some say you're angry. What would you call it?" Jasmine looked dead at him. "Truthful." Jimmy opened his mouth, but didn't say anything. The audience shifted. The tension wasn't dramatic or explosive. It was the quiet kind, like everyone realized this conversation had stopped being an act a few minutes ago. "Well, sure, truthful is good," Jimmy said, laughing a little too hard. "But I mean, you have been in some pretty heated exchanges, right?" "You ever ask Senator Kennedy that?" she replied calmly. "Or is being heated only an issue when it's a woman?" Jimmy blinked again. His smile faltered just slightly. I think we have a clip, actually," he tried. "No," she cut in, voice still cool as ever. "Don't play a clip of me unless you're playing clips of everybody else losing their temper. Otherwise, you're not showing the truth. You're selling a version." The crowd murmured. Someone in the back even clapped, but stopped when no one joined in. Jimmy cleared his throat. "Look, Jasmine, I wasn't trying to—" "I know," she said, softening just slightly. "But you are. That's the thing. It's baked into how this whole space works. I show up here as me, unfiltered, unpolished, real, and the first thing I get called is spicy." Jimmy looked like he wanted to say something, but Jasmine leaned forward just enough for the camera to catch her full expression. "When you say that, what you're really saying is, you don't act like the people we're used to watching on this couch. But maybe that's not my problem. Maybe that's yours. The silence that followed was different than before. Heavier. Even the band, always ready with a rim shot or background sting, stayed dead quiet. Jimmy looked down again, nodding slowly. This time, for real. Fair enough, he said. Jasmine leaned back. That's all I wanted. And for a few seconds, that was it. No laughter, no cue card jokes, just two people sitting across from each other in front of a few million viewers in a moment that didn't feel rehearsed or produced. It felt real and a little too close for comfort. But Jimmy wasn't about to let the segment end on a low. All right, he said, flashing a grin that was only half working. Let's talk about something lighter. You brought your dog, right? I heard he peed on Capitol property and made headlines. The audience laughed. The tension cracked just a little. Jasmine gave a small smirk. He has better instincts than some of my colleagues. That got a real laugh. Not forced, not polite, but the kind people let out when they're grateful for a moment to breathe again. But even though the tone shifted, the moment hadn't passed. Something had changed, and everyone could feel it. The cameras kept rolling, but the room hadn't quite reset. Jimmy leaned on humor to steer things back, but his rhythm was off. You could tell he knew it too. Jasmine, on the other hand, looked completely steady, like she'd been in this chair before, even if she hadn't. So, Jimmy said, shuffling the next card in his hand, we've talked about politics. You've checked me a few times. I think I'm still recovering, but let's talk about your future. Congresswoman today, but what about tomorrow? Senate? White House? Netflix special? That last bit was meant to be a joke. It landed awkwardly. Jasmine chuckled, but there was something sharp behind her smile. Funny thing about the future, she said. Everyone thinks they know yours better than you do. Jimmy paused. Meaning? I mean, every time I step into a space like this, somebody tries to write my story for me before I've even finished a sentence. People like to skip to the end when it's someone like me. He raised an eyebrow. Someone like you? Black, female, loud when I need to be, quiet when it makes them uncomfortable, smart enough to make some folks feel like they have to prove something. A hush settled over the audience again, not forced, just natural, like they were trying to follow something that didn't come with a laugh track. Jimmy tried again. You've had a few viral moments already. That exchange with the oversight committee, the press conference where you shut down that reporter from Dallas. I guess what I'm wondering is, do you want to be seen this way? As someone who claps back? Jasmine leaned in, finally ready to drop it. Jimmy, when you grow up being told to be twice as good and still get talked about like you're twice as difficult, you learn to pick your words. So if I give you one sentence that makes it past the noise, believe me, it's not about being viral. It's about being heard. That sentence hung in the air like a gavel strike. You could see Jimmy's eyes widen just slightly, not in offense, but in recognition. Like someone who just got told something they thought they understood, but didn't really get until now. The audience didn't clap immediately. They didn't have to. Everyone was watching her. And it wasn't just admiration. It was something deeper. It was respect. I'm not trying to be anybody's meme, she added, but if one sentence can make people stop and think, even for a second, then maybe I said what needed to be said. Jimmy didn't answer right away. He turned his note card face down on the desk. Well, he said, voice lower now, you said it. There was a beat. Then someone in the back, maybe one of the camera guys, clapped once, a few others joined. Then it caught like a match. Applause swelled, not a standing ovation, not yet, but it was enough to shift the room. Jimmy turned to the camera, breaking format. We'll be right back, he said, looking a little more thoughtful than he had 10 minutes earlier. The screen faded to commercial. Behind the scenes, no one moved for a few seconds. The crew whispered. A producer waved someone over with a headset. Jimmy sat quiet in his chair, blinking, lips pressed into a tight line, like he was replaying the last 5 minutes over in his head. Jasmine? She reached for her water again, calm, centered, like she hadn't just flipped a late-night studio upside down with a handful of sentences. But if that moment on stage had shifted the tone, what happened after would shake up everything far beyond that studio. When they came back from commercial, the mood felt off. Not awkward, just unsure. The audience clapped as they were told, but it didn't have the same bounce it did earlier. Some folks looked like they weren't sure whether they were watching a late-night show or something else entirely. Jimmy tried to reset things. We're back with Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who just casually handed me my own show on a silver platter, he said, chuckling. It was a decent line. He smiled wide, clearly hoping for an easy laugh. Jasmine offered a polite smirk. Just doing my civic duty. More laughter this time. Relief, even. But something had changed between them. You could see it in how Jimmy sat up straighter now, didn't lean in quite the same. He wasn't scared, just aware. Aware that he'd walked into a moment that had become bigger than both of them. So tell me, he continued, voice lighter now, what's something people get wrong about you all the time? Jasmine didn't miss a beat. That I came here to play nice. That got a real laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was honest. And when people say something that honest on television, the reaction is never just about the joke, it's about the release. Jimmy nodded. Fair enough. And I'll say this, I may not agree with everything you say, but I definitely wouldn't want to debate you without a lifeline and 3 assistants. Now that landed. The crowd roared. Jasmine even laughed for real this time. It was the first full laugh she'd given since the interview started, and it broke some of the leftover tension in the room. They spent the next few minutes talking about community work, her district in Dallas, the bill she'd been fighting to pass about expanding mental health resources for underserved neighborhoods. It wasn't fluff, but it was safer ground. The kind of content that got clipped for social media but wouldn't get anyone fired. Still, you could feel it. Underneath every sentence was a ripple, everyone in the room still circling back to that exchange from earlier. You couldn't unhear it. You couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. During the final moments of the interview, Jimmy reached for something he rarely did, genuine appreciation. Look, Jasmine, he said, whatever people think of politics, I think what's clear is you're not afraid to be exactly who you are, and I respect that, even when it scares me a little. Jasmine didn't miss a beat. Growth starts at discomfort, he chuckled. I'll be quoting that for a week. As they stood up to shake hands for the goodbye, something surprising happened. The audience stood, not a planned standing ovation. No cue, no sign from the stage manager. They just rose, one by one, some clapping, a few with hands to their mouths, others recording on their phones. Jimmy seemed a little thrown by it. Jasmine looked almost amused. Thank y'all, she said into the mic before heading off stage. The credits rolled over a wide shot of the audience still on their feet. The band started playing, but their music felt quieter somehow, like it didn't want to interrupt whatever had just taken place. Backstage, a different kind of chaos was starting to ripple. A couple producers whispered behind a curtain. A makeup artist kept checking her phone, eyes wide. A young staffer with a headset whispered, "We're trending already." Jimmy stood near the monitor, watching the playback. He wasn't talking, just staring at the moment she asked him, "You ever get tired of white guys calling you spicy?" He turned to the executive producer. "You think I went too far?" The producer didn't answer right away. "I think you poked someone who's used to fighting battles with a microphone in one hand and her dignity in the other." Jimmy sighed. "Yeah, and I was holding cue cards." But while Jimmy tried to process what had just happened inside that studio, the outside world was already reacting, and fast. By the time Jimmy had finished his post-show wrap-up and Jasmine's car pulled away from the studio lot, the internet was already on fire. The clip hit X, formerly Twitter, within 20 minutes. A blurry phone video from an audience member with the caption, "She didn't even raise her voice. Jasmine Crockett just folded Kimmel in real time." That post had over 300,000 views in under an hour. Then came the TikToks, edits with dramatic background music, side-by-side reactions. A user named @PoliticoBaddie posted, "I've watched this 12 times, the way she said, 'Maybe that's not my problem, maybe that's yours.' That's gonna live rent-free in my brain forever." The comment section exploded. Half the internet was cheering, the other half arguing. Finally, someone called him out without yelling. "Why invite strong women on your show if you're gonna talk to them like caricatures? It was a joke. Get over it." He got what he deserved. The segment hit YouTube by midnight, not through the official channel, but some bootleg screen recording that someone had cleaned up and subtitled. 10 hours later, it was the #3 trending video across the platform. By morning, it wasn't just politics junkies or comedy nerds talking. It had hit the group chats, the Facebook feeds, the morning coffee crowd. On The View, Ana Navarro said, "I've been in green rooms with Jasmine Crockett. That woman is not here to play checkers." ESPN's Stephen A. Smith mentioned it on his podcast. Was it a political moment? Maybe, but what I saw was someone take a verbal elbow and send it right back without even getting up from the chair. Even local radio stations in places like Flagstaff and Bakersfield were mentioning it between traffic reports, but not all the attention was positive. A handful of conservative commentators latched onto the moment like it was a threat. Another angry Democrat woman throwing a tantrum on live TV. They tried to frame it as unprofessional, out of line, disrespectful, but Jasmine had said nothing disrespectful. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't called names. She hadn't even changed her tone. And that's what made it powerful. She let the words do the lifting. And the silence after? That was what people couldn't stop talking about. The way Jimmy didn't know what to say. The way the audience went from laughing to thinking. The way the air shifted on live television with just a few sentences. By lunchtime, major media outlets were reaching out to her team for comment. CNN, MSNBC, NPR. Even 60 Minutes left a message asking if she'd be open to a sit-down. Her communications director, a wiry guy named Andre, just shook his head as the requests piled in. "Do we even respond?" someone asked. Jasmine looked up from her phone. "We don't need to." "Not even a tweet?" She smiled. "Let them keep talking. I already said what I needed to say." That became its own headline. Jasmine Crockett responds to viral interview, "I already said what I needed to say." Support poured in from corners of the internet that rarely agreed on anything. Young activists praised her clarity. Older voters appreciated her restraint. Even a few celebrities chimed in. Ava DuVernay called her unshakable. Kerry Washington reposted the clip with a single word: respect. Jimmy Kimmel's camp eventually released a quiet statement through a spokesperson. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't a defense either. Just a few lines saying he appreciated Jasmine's candor and believed in honest, tough conversations. Some people called it weak, others called it enough. But while the internet buzzed and dissected the moment from every angle, the deeper story was still waiting to be told. The one about why that sentence mattered so much in the first place. Before the memes and headlines, before late-night applause and awkward laughter, there was a girl in East Dallas, sitting at the back of a classroom, raising her hand too often. Jasmine Crockett was that kid, the one who always had a question the teacher didn't want to answer. The one who got labeled difficult when she asked why the school library had outdated books or why nobody ever taught them about people who looked like her. Her mom worked nights as a nurse at Methodist Dallas Medical Center. Her dad ran a small auto shop that never seemed to close. They didn't have much, but they had enough for Jasmine to feel safe, to feel seen. What they didn't have was time. So Jasmine learned how to stand her ground early. She wasn't loud, at least not at first, but she was precise. If you tried to put her in a box, she'd ask who built it and why it only had space for one kind of voice. In college at Prairie View A&M, she majored in political science and picked up a second job on the campus help desk. She spent her weekends in debate halls, often going against people with more money, more polish, and more connections. But she had fire, and not the kind that burned out fast, the kind that sat low and steady, always glowing, never begging to be noticed. Law school sharpened her edges. Working in public defense exposed her to the kind of injustice that didn't come with hashtags or headlines. She sat across from mothers begging for help in courtrooms that didn't even pretend to listen. She wrote motions late into the night while her fridge buzzed in a one-bedroom apartment near Duncanville. Every time she opened her mouth in court, someone called her aggressive. Every time she raised a point, someone said she was too passionate. Every time she stood up, someone warned her she'd go further if she just smiled more. She kept receipts, not just of the words, but of how they made her feel, how every label tried to shrink her, flatten her into something that could be dismissed. So when Jimmy Kimmel called her spicy, it wasn't about that one moment. It was about a lifetime of coded language. It was about hearing the same tone in different mouths. It was about the years she spent learning how to say, no, not this time. And that's why her sentence, maybe that's not my problem, maybe that's yours, hit like it did. Because for so long, the burden was on people like her to adjust, to smooth things over, to understand the context. But Jasmine had reached a point where she wasn't interested in adjusting. She was more interested in accuracy and grace and knowing that you can correct someone without humiliating them. That's why the audience respected her. That's why the clip resonated. It wasn't a gotcha. It wasn't rage. It was control. The kind that's earned from years of watching others tell your story for you. And it reminded people, especially women of color, that you don't have to perform softness to deserve respect. You don't have to water down your words to make people comfortable. You can be clear, you can be calm, and you can still shift a room with a sentence. Andre, her comms guy, said it best in a text to a friend the night the clip blew up. She didn't come here to trend. She came here to remind people why they listen in the first place. And that's what stuck. Not the tension, not the jokes, not even the applause, just the truth. But as the headlines started to quiet down, one final moment brought everything full circle. And it happened when no one was watching. It happened 2 days later. No cameras, no audience. Just a quiet hallway backstage at the El Capitan Theater in Hollywood. Jimmy Kimmel was back on set preparing for that night's taping. Crew members shuffled around, prepping lights, adjusting sound levels, reviewing the run sheet. The world had mostly moved on to the next viral moment, but something was still hanging over the studio. Jasmine Crockett had returned, not as a guest, but for a closed-door meeting with one of the producers about a community initiative she'd been pushing involving media literacy and political education in underserved schools. She didn't plan to see Jimmy, but as fate, or coincidence, would have it, they crossed paths in the hallway near the dressing rooms. He saw her first. For a second he hesitated, but then he stepped forward. "Hey," he said. His voice was quiet. Jasmine looked at him, not cold, not surprised, just present. "Hey." He paused. You could tell he was thinking carefully, not because he wanted to say the right thing, but because he didn't want to waste her time. "I've been thinking about what you said, that night," he added. Jasmine gave a small nod. "I think I got comfortable," he continued. "Too comfortable. Forgot that being funny doesn't excuse being careless." She tilted her head. "You're not the first. You won't be the last." "I know," he said, "but I don't want to be either of those things." A beat of silence. Then Jasmine softened, just slightly. "Then don't be." Jimmy exhaled like someone had been holding his breath for him. "Thank you for not torching me," he said. Jasmine smirked. "I don't torch. I clarify." He laughed, really laughed this time. The hallway, the lights, even the weight of the moment. They all felt lighter now. That small exchange didn't make headlines. No one caught it on a phone. There were no applause breaks, no edits with dramatic music. But it mattered, because growth, the real kind, doesn't always come with a camera pointed at it. Sometimes it's just two people meeting in the middle without performance or pressure. Just honesty. Later that week, Jasmine gave a talk at a high school in Tulsa. One student raised her hand and asked, "How do you stay calm when people try to make you small?" Jasmine didn't hesitate. "You don't give them the power to define you," she said. "And you remember, there's nothing louder than grace." That line made it into a school newsletter. A teacher printed it out and pinned it to the wall. And maybe that's the lesson in all of this. Sometimes, standing your ground doesn't look like shouting. It looks like knowing exactly who you are when someone tries to reduce you to a soundbite. It looks like letting your words carry weight, not because you yell, but because you mean them. Jasmine didn't win an argument that night on Kimmel's show. She didn't destroy anyone. What she did was hold space for herself, for every woman who's ever been dismissed, for every young person who's ever been told to tone it down, for every person who's ever been labeled before they've had the chance to speak. And in doing so, she reminded us all, you don't have to shrink to be seen. You don't have to clap back to be clear. You don't have to fight dirty to win respect. Sometimes one well-placed sentence can shake a room more than any performance ever could. And if you felt something while listening to this story, if it made you pause or reflect, then don't keep it to yourself. Share it, speak up, and hit that subscribe button. Because stories like these, they're not just entertainment, they're reminders, and we need more of them.